Welcome back to the Cycle Report. There's something I've always found interesting about various manufacturers and their claims, their brand slogans, their mantras, if you will. So when KTM, an Austrian motorcycle manufacturer, claims their slogan for the company is "Ready to Race," that's kind of a major throwdown. And when looking at this 990 SMT that we're riding today, I don't know, it doesn't look like a race bike to me. So is it all just marketing BS? Or is there something to it? The KTM 990 SMT. This is a 2010 model. It was made for a few years, very briefly, and was one of those motorcycles that was critically acclaimed but just didn't sell a whole lot. And I think it's because it's kind of polarizing, kind of confusing, and no one really can wrap their head around it. So let's unpack that today. The Supermoto, as we've kind of talked about, sort of dirt bike for the street, if you will. So the SM in the title stands for Supermoto, and this particular model is an SMT, which is sort of the touring variant. They added a more comfortable seat. They messed with the suspension a little bit to make it more of a sporty road-going bike. It's got a larger gas tank, a decent little windshield, and once again, removable luggage. So yes, removable luggage in a hooligan bike. So styling-wise, KTM is always known for being really aggressive in their styling. They don't make anything soft, and everything's jagged and hard-edged and pushing forward and just looks mean. This particular motorcycle, I think, reminds me of the old stealth bomber. It just looks tough and imposing. Not what I'd call beautiful, but it definitely has presence. The engine is a 990cc V-twin, and it makes about 115 horsepower and 65 to 70 pound-feet of torque, almost the entire rev range. This thing has lots of grunt, and while it doesn't make biggest number on paper as far as peak horsepower goes, it's got yank and pull all over the place. It's got so much torque and it revs so quickly that you can be in first gear, just kind of yank the throttle, and the front wheel comes up pretty much every time. It's always kind of chomping at the bit and ready to go, which is really, really cool. It feels special all the time. It's not something you'd throw the keys to a brand new rider on, because it will feel intimidating. It really feels like it wants to get away from you all the time. So we know it can go, but how does it stop? It's got radial mounted Brembo brakes, the kind of stuff you see in really high-end superbikes. If you've never had anything with a proper braking kit, you step onto this and you realize that you can do panic stops with one finger, or maybe just two, and it'll rip your face off. And the rear brake is so strong, you can kind of lock it up and slide the back end around at will. It's really fun. You see a theme here? Fun. It's got a tube frame chassis that's really stiff and really light. In fact, even though this is a really large motorcycle, it weighs only about 430 pounds without fuel in it, which is incredible because standing next to it, it looks like a horse. To keep that weight down, they use different materials. The gas tank is plastic. The fenders are plastic, and they're actually kind of flimsy, like you'd find on a dirt bike. They're used to making dirt bikes that are lightweight, and that same kind of philosophy translates to everything they make. Which leads us to the suspension, which is, truth be told, the best part of this motorcycle. KTM a while back bought a company called WP that was one of the really high-end aftermarket suspension companies. The kind of stuff that people would buy a competitive motocross bike and then throw WP suspension on it to make it even better. So the advantage of that is KTM puts WP suspension on every single model they sell. So it's such a huge advantage whenever you're buying a KTM, knowing that you're getting some of the best in the business, and it makes such a difference in this motorcycle. It has got tons of adjustment, rebound and preload like a lot of motorcycles, but then you also get high-speed damping and low-speed damping in separate increments. So you can control how it takes bumps while you're cruising along, so you can make this thing glide like a cloud over railroad crossings and potholes and bumps and gravel roads. But then you can adjust the high speed separately to make it handle almost like a sport bike at speed. It's tremendous, and it's so comfortable, and it's so much fun, and it really, really makes this a whole nother step above any other motorcycle I've ever ridden with traditional mechanical suspension. A lot of newer high-end bikes are starting to get electronic suspension, magnet ride, just like some of the cars are getting. And that stuff, I've experienced a little bit of it, and it is really impressive. But it should be, shouldn't it? The handling and chassis are so flickable that you can throw it into corners, you can drive it like a dirt bike. It is awesome. It's so much fun. It feels alive all the time, but you absolutely have the option to kind of lean back and cruise on the highway for hours and hours and hours. I mean, this is a touring bike after all. I mean, at least it's a touring variant, and it'll do it really well. As for controls and instruments, the mirrors are great. They're a little chunky, but they barely ever vibrate. You get a really clear picture, and they're just in the right place that you can position them and get a really good look behind you. So A+ there. On the other hand, the instrument cluster leaves a little to be desired. Now, I know this isn't a brand new bike, and new KTMs have basically what looks like a small iPad attached to the dash. It's got a really easy to read tachometer, and it's got a digital speedo, which is my favorite combination, honestly. It's easy to look down and see what's going on. It's got a trip computer with an A and a B setting, a clock, which is cool, and a temperature gauge for the engine coolant. So most of your essentials are covered. But for something that's supposed to be like a touring variant, there isn't a fuel gauge. There's just a fuel light. This is a little lacking, if I'm being honest. Getting to the pros and cons, honestly, everything that involves riding and movement is superb. The engine, the transmission, the clutch, all the levers and controls, the power delivery, the suspension, the chassis, the handling, the braking, it is all awesome. This first year model does not have ABS. It does not have any traction control. It does not have driver modes. Your traction control and driver modes are right here with your wrist. And honestly, as an experienced rider, that's the way I like it. I never understood what the point of taking something that was really high performance and hitting a button to make it slower for the rider to be able to handle it, so it wasn't too much for him. In my opinion, if you can't handle a 150 horsepower motorcycle, or 115 horsepower motorcycle in this case, go buy something less powerful. It's that simple. When you're ready for it, you buy something like this, or something faster. So then we go to the cons, because trust me, it's not all perfect. The first con is exclusivity. So in having a rare bike and a rare brand, at least in the United States, you have to deal with a fairly big lack of information when troubleshooting. The forum activity is nothing like it would be on a much more popular motorcycle. Another problem with exclusivity is the aftermarket. It's really hard to find a lot of choices when you want to replace parts. If you're looking for exhausts or new windscreens or new foot pegs, you're going to have like a handful of choices instead of a plethora of choices on a more common Japanese bike. And when you do get those choices, you're just going to have to realize that they're going to be expensive. Another thing that kind of gets me, this matte black paint job always looks horrendous. And there's not much to do about it. Some of the fasteners are known to rust a little prematurely. Another problem with this motorcycle is upkeep. There is no getting around it. Everything is expensive for it. Let's just go for an oil change. If you use the stuff they recommend, the oil for this motorcycle is about $70. And then there's the filter kit. Oh yes, I said kit. It's not just a filter, it's 2 filters, a screen, and a whole set of gaskets for all the various access panels you have to open. Let's say you damage something on this bike, it will be wildly expensive to replace. Let's look at the gas tank for an example. This one has a little gouge in it. It's not that big of a deal. It's maybe a 1/3 of an inch long and doesn't really hurt anything, but it certainly is an eyesore. Let's say you wanted to replace it, or if it sprung a leak and you wanted to replace the gas tank. The gas tank for this motorcycle costs $1,400. Now that might be one of the more expensive bits on it, but it just gives you a perspective of what you're looking at if you end up having something like this and you want to keep it long term. It's going to cost you. So with the pros and cons list that kind of almost outweigh each other, who buys this thing? I do. This is mine. I bought this motorcycle despite its flaws because I like its pros so much. I needed something that would perform like a sport bike, and I wanted it comfortable enough to get me to great roads all over the country without having to break my back in the process. And this fits the bill. This thing always wants to play and be goofy, but it does every job I need it to really, really well. And it's not perfect, but this is one of the most fun motorcycles I've ever ridden. So I'm willing to forgive some of the fit and finish details or the added cost of maintenance because it really is many motorcycles built into one. It's kind of a business up front, party in the back. Does that make it a mullet cycle? So let's go back to our earlier question about the marketing. Ready to race. What do I think about that after spending some time on this? I actually think it's legit. This bike doesn't know it isn't a race bike. Hey, you want to be a complete maniac? Buy one of these things. The bike is crazier than you. It has the attitude, the snarl, and the character of a nasty weapon of a machine. So Ready to Race kind of makes sense to me. Just seems ready for anything, honestly. Anyway, I think I'm going to keep riding because I can't get enough of this thing. Thank you so much for watching the Cycle Report. I'll see you next time.
You're watching Everyday Driver. We make a TV show, podcast,
and YouTube channels dedicated to great cars, driving adventures, and helping you find a car you'll love.
subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss a thing.